before, I just want to welcome you all here and introduce, everyone knows Shiko, anyway, or Dr. Shiko, excuse me, who will be reading an excerpt from her latest work, and one that, though I haven't read it yet, I'm sure is going to be quite good, because all the other stuff that Shiko does is quite fabulous. So I can't think of anything else but to introduce Shiko and to have her read for us. Thank you.
Thanks everyone for coming. I'm so happy that you all made the time. I know it's so difficult, like it's cold outside and it's dark and it's a crazy time of the semester, and so thank you for coming. I see my students here, they insist that I call them my graduates, but no, as long as you're in my class, you're my student forever and ever. So thanks Noreen and Joe and Sharon for coming, and everyone else. I'd like also to thank the Department of Urban Studies for its support, and Maureen, who has been the one that has really taken care of all the good food that we have here. The Intergenerational Urban Institute, which has, through Maureen, has supported the launch, and Steve and Tak and all my fabulous colleagues. So before I read, I just wanted to talk about the project and how it came about. About 10 years ago, I would say, my niece was reading a book, and she was reading this storybook by the British author Enid Blyton. I don't know whether you Enid Blyton, you do, right? Yeah. So she was reading it, and I was like, wow, that's what still you're reading, because that's what I read when I was growing up, and I couldn't believe that my niece so many years later was still reading the same thing. And she was like, yeah, you know, I'm reading it, but it's interesting, but it's like, she wasn't connecting with it because it wasn't within her experience. And that's when I got the idea that I could write the same type of book. So I got the idea that I should write the same type of book for Kenyan kids. You know, the same type of Enid Blyton kids, you know, something within their experience. So I did that, and it ended up being a series that was called TJ and the first formers, second formers, third formers, fourth formers. It was a 4-part series, and it was published in Kenya by the Kenya Literature Bureau, and it actually became a Ministry of Education recommended class reader. So, you know, so time passed, as I said, it was 10 years ago, so I came to this country, I started doing my PhD, kind of forgot my creative side, and, you know, I started doing the boring scholarly work, but then, you know, once if you really have a creative, and I'm sure this is true for everyone who has some art that they enjoy, it's almost like you can't run away from it. It keeps pulling you back. So as soon as I was done with my PhD, I immediately started thinking about going back to my creative writing, because that has always been something that pulled me. So I went back and looked at my little series, and by then, you know, I had been in this country. I had seen, especially, you know, what people here think about Africa, and just the impressions that people have, and the media representation of what Africa is, and a lot of those things I was just not happy with. And I decided that I would take my TJ series and revise it and make it in such a way that it can be read by kids here. So this is actually a revision of the series that I had done in Kenya. But it's really different. If you read the TJ series and you read this one, it's kind of the same skeleton of the story, but, you know, the incidents are different. Now, what I've done with this book is, because I wanted it to be not just entertainment, and it's a lot of fun. I'm sure Chuck can probably tell you that because he's read the book. But other than just being fun, I want it to be something that kids can learn from. So what I've done is, I've actually put footnotes to explain some things that are in the text so that they don't interfere with the flow of the book, but people understand, you know, for example, when people, you know, I hear people say, oh, you are Kenyan, you sound like a Kenyan, and I say, you know, there's really no Kenyan sound. There are 42 different ethnic groups in Kenya, and they sound different. So I explain things like that, and how those types of groups relate to each other, and so my endnotes, my footnotes explain things like that. As I said, I have found that the media representation of Africa is really horrendous. It's either AIDS or war or famine or all kinds of horrible things, or wild animals, right? I mean, you see, you saw the Sudanese teacher who you know, who had been pictured, you know, with, I don't know whether it was a tiger or a leopard or something, and those are the images that come out. Now, I don't know anyone who goes and poses with a tiger, like, you know, but when you see a picture like that here, you know, that's what people think. I've actually had people say, oh, you are so lucky, you got away. And I said, there was nothing to get away from, not really. You know, and so and what happens with the media is that there are pockets of trouble, obviously, but those pockets of trouble are so amplified and they are generalized to the whole continent, which is not true. It's rather like, suppose you came here and went to the Skid Row and saw all those people lying in the streets in winter, homeless, and then you went and took that around the world and said, this is America. No one would ever want to come to the US, right? I mean, so this is the way people sleep outside. So that's what happens, and people just have those unfortunate images. So for me, this book is much more than entertainment. It's really, I'm hoping, something that can educate the kids about, you know, first of all, tell the good stories about Africa, because I'm one of the good stories. You know, the Africa that I see portrayed on television is not the Africa that I grew up in. And I grew up there, I went to school there, I did my bachelor's education there, I did my master's education there, so it's degree there, so it's really not the Africa that I know. And I wasn't even a rich kid, so don't even think that, oh, you know, she was born in the city. No, in fact, I grew up as a daughter of small-scale coffee farmers. And don't read anything into the character that she's a daughter. That's not me, though, but that's how I grew up. So I didn't grow up rich, but I still grew up, you know, in a rich experience. And just because people tend to think that poverty makes you not human, which is not true. You can be poor and perfectly happy, and you can be rich and perfectly miserable. Now, am I advocating for poverty? Absolutely not. but I'm just saying there's a tendency for us to look at the conditions and the circumstances under which people are living and then dehumanize them that way. But then to me, I think that everyone's experience is the same, whether we are poor or rich. It's only the circumstances that are different, and that's another point that I want to bring up in this book, so that when kids here read this book and they see, oh, this is the way African kids are, they'll see that they are just perfectly just the same as they are. It's only that they are living under different circumstances. The other thing that I want to have as a message in this book is the whole globalization and how it has affected kids. You know, things like, for example, there are kids whose parents work in a factory where they produce Nike shoes and all these designer jeans, and they walk barefoot. You know, that's how you are part of the global world, and yet you're not part of it. You know, you're part of it, but yet you're excluded from it. Because if your dad is working for a firm that's producing these global things to be exported, and yet you're walking barefoot, you're really not part of it, and yet you're very much part of it. So that's another lesson. And the other one is just the diversity of experiences that African kids, you know, there are some who are very rich, some who are very poor, some in the middle. You cannot say a place like Africa. Like I've had people say, if you go to a place like Africa, and I look at the person and say, what place like Africa? There is no place like Africa. I mean, it's like, it's a huge continent with many different diverse people and varieties of experiences. So you cannot just say, when I go to a place like Africa, that's not a valid statement whatsoever. So those are kind of the few lessons that I have tried to teach in this book. However, it's not this. The lessons are really very subtle. The book is still about kids having fun, and it's jokes, and it's, you know, it's easy read. So I hope you do get a chance to read it and enjoy it. Okay, so I'm going to read from chapter 2, which kind of explains the names, you know, the whole names thing. Because I know that some people, when they come here, they change their names to English or American sounding names so that they can fit in. But many of us from Africa, we come with those names. We have those names from when we are little. You know, we are baptized, like, you know, we are Christian when we are like 7 days old, and you're given this foreign name because apparently your African name is not good enough. And for me, it was really a stressful thing because, you know, I came and my name was Anne, A-N-N-E, and people would ask me, what's your name? And I would say, Anne. And they'd say, Anne? And they're trying to figure out, okay, how do I spell that? Like, is it U-N? Is it A? and then I would spell it out. I'd say, yeah, I'd say A-N-N-E, and then they would go, oh, Ian! so when they did that, I immediately knew that, okay, when it gets to the point where you cannot pronounce your name, it's time to drop it. So that's how my official names, and Ras knows, my official names are Anne, but I use Shiko from then onwards, because I don't want to have a name that I cannot pronounce. So anyway, I just want to read a section of, you know, how do these names come about. So I'll read from chapter 2. By this chapter, you know, my book is called Te, and the form 1 is, Te is actually initials of the girl. My main character is T-A-Y. Those are her initials. And she's not owning up to her name because it's so ridiculous. That's why she calls herself Te and refuses to tell everyone else what her name is. So in the first chapter, when they had to introduce themselves during class, she refused to own up to her name, and she wouldn't tell people. So in the second chapter, her friends now are asking her, what does Te mean exactly? And that's where I'm going to start. Okay, so chapter 2, and the title is Friends in the House. Te turned to see Haki standing behind her. It was break time, and the girls were doing their favorite break time thing, standing outside basking in the sun. St. Clair's was on high altitude, about 2,300 meters above sea level on the highlands east of the Great Rift Valley. Although it was only about 50 kilometers south of the equator, St. Clair's could be quite cold due to the high elevation. During the months of June and July, temperatures dropped to as low as 4 degrees centigrade, and the sun refused to show up for days. Sasa Haki, Te replied, pleased to see her classmate. Although the girls at St. Clair spoke mostly English, the standard greeting was in Sheng, an urban combination of Kiswahili and English. Sheng was a challenge to teachers everywhere, bad for both languages. It was Thursday, 3 days since Miss Sashi's first class. Te had wanted to talk to Haki earlier, but the other girls seemed unwilling to talk to anyone. The episode with Ida seemed to have affected Haki badly, and Te was not sure how to approach her. She was glad that Haki had taken the first step. Thanks for standing up for me the other day, Haki said. Oh, it's nothing, Te replied. And don't worry about Ida. The only way to deal with her is to ignore her. Haki saw Maisha standing a short distance away. She was eating a cookie. Haki waved. Maisha walked over to where the other two girls were standing. Still trying to find yourself? Asked Haki with a laugh. replied Maisha as she finished her cookie. Te and Haki laughed. In the short time that the girls had been at St. Clair's, the Form 1As had begun to understand just how much Maisha loved eating. She had a good sense of humor about it too. So Te, Maisha continued, changing the topic. What exactly does your name mean? T-A-Y, just 3 letters of the alphabet. We've heard that version already, Maisha persisted. She was never one to shy away from anything. Te looked uncomfortable. You don't have to tell us, said Haki quickly. She knew all about humiliation. Te could not bring herself to accept her name. She had complained to her dad about it countless times. He kept telling her that if she were not so conscious about it, other people would not think the name that odd. He probably had a point, but that did not make the name any more acceptable to Te. I will tell you, Te said. The 2 girls looked at Te expectantly, eager to hear how, when, and why someone had dreamt up a name like Theodolia Apollonia. Most of the girls had Christian names, mostly English names really, along with their given names. Many of their given names had meanings. Maisha, for example, meant life, a perfect fit for the adventurous, happy-go-lucky Muslim girl in a Catholic school who loved to eat and laugh about it. Te explained that she had ended up with the ridiculous Theodolia Apollonia after her parents had humored her grandmother, who had wanted them to name their baby daughter after her own mother. So how did Te's great-grandma get a name like that in the first place? It turned out that when her great-grandmother was a little girl growing up in a remote village near the Kenya-Ugandan border, the parish priest was an elderly Italian missionary. In those days, the priest decided what name to christen his parishioners. Okay, that has got to be a joke, said Haki, interrupting Te. If it was, it wasn't very funny, Te replied. The priest actually decided on the kids' names? Said Te, now enjoying the incredulous looks on her classmates' faces. And get this, Theodolia Apollonia was the old priest's mother's name. The year my great-grandma was baptized just happened to be the year that the priest's mother died. That year, he named all the girls in his parish after his mother. Wow, those were a lot of Theodolia Apollonias, he explained. All the 3 girls laughed, enjoying the conversation. So you mean to say that because of a long dead woman, Maisha said in wonder, in another country, Te said, another continent, Haki interjected, I'm stuck with a name like Theodolia Apollonia. So that's kind of, that's not even a made-up story. That's my 2 grandmothers were named Maria Goretti, and I always used to be so fascinated that the both of them had the same name, and there were these old ladies, you know, Maria Goretti, and I was like, so I asked them, how did you get that name? And you know, my grandmother told me that's the way it used to be. The priest just used to go, like they would all go, like, you know, on the same Sunday, they would all be Christian the same day. So if you happen to be on a Sunday that the priest has decided Maria Goretti is the name, that's the name you get. So even today, there are so many people with exotic names like, you know, Boniface. Gaetano is another very common one in my village, believe it or not. So there are all those interesting names, and then unfortunately, because they are, you know, like in my ethnic group, Kikuyus, we name after our parents and our sisters and brothers. So they have taken the tradition and now they use the Christian names as well. So we still have kids who are having these ridiculous names because their grandmothers had these names. So the whole idea of ridiculous names continues. Until maybe you come to a country like this and and realize that you don't even know how to pronounce it, and you say forget about it.
How did you choose Shiko?
I didn't actually choose Shiko. Shiko is like my name. It's my middle name. My given name is Wanjiko, and the short form of that is Shiko. So that wasn't like, I didn't invent that one. So it was always my name. Yeah.
Was it given to you after your mother or grandmother or whatever? How did that name came about?
What? The
Shiko name, that is.
Oh yeah, that I was named after my aunt actually. Yeah.
On your mother's side?
Other questions?
On your mother's side?
My aunt on my father's side.
Father's
Just
side.
because I came from a huge family, so all the grandmothers had already been named before me. That's how I ended up being named after an aunt.
You explained this from 1A, because I'm sure, you know, someone who has a British orientation will understand it, but
Yeah.
in America that would be difficult to understand what is from 1A.
Well, I don't think, not so much now, especially after reading the Harry Potters, because the Harry Potters are British, right? And they use the form. Plus, that's the thing, the idea is to educate. So I could not say grade 1, that's not authentic, you know, because that's not what we use. We use form 1, you know, we use the British system, and that's what the kids need to read and learn, just kind of making them globally aware of what's going on, not just their world here in the US. I can read another, do you want me to read something else, maybe?
Yeah.
Just a very short passage here. And this one, I was trying to illustrate the differences among, you know, just how different it is. Like, we only think of the very poor, but there are very rich people and very poor people, and just how the society is so social class oriented. And so in this small passage that I've chosen, the kids are talking about, you know, they're having visitors. It's visitors day. It's a boarding school, obviously, and they have a day that's designated for visitors. So the visitors are coming in, and there are, you know, different groups of kids sitting differently. So I just read that. This one is very short. Okay. After their church services, the girls sat basking in the sun and looking out for their visitors. There was always a festive atmosphere on visiting day. Every bench and almost every inch of grass in the front section of the main school building was occupied by girls eagerly waiting for their visitors. Heads popped up hopefully every time a car pulled up. Most of the cars were Toyotas and Nissans, probably the most common cars on Kenyan roads. Many of the Japanese-made cars were Mitumba, and I have a footnote there explaining what Mitumba cars are. They are second-hand cars that are imported from Dubai, you know, from the United Arab Emirates, and have gone on to talk about how, because it's become so easy to purchase these second-hand cars, they have really clogged the Kenyan roads, which were just not prepared. You know, the road system was just not prepared for this influx in cars, and this is kind of showing what the effects of globalization have been on the country. So I kind of put that on a footnote just to explain what's going on, so that it doesn't, you know, interrupt the story. So most of the Kenyan cars were Mitumba. 2 or 3 parents pulled up in a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW. Yvonne Curry and her third form clone, with whom she had co-starred in the Savo House play, and a group of other girls sat on a bench. These were Yvonne's real friends. Now, Yvonne is like this very rich kid. These were Yvonne's real friends, quite separate from her army of servants. They were all from rich families, and they were all members of the Young Farmers Club. They were playing a guessing game, trying to determine the age of the cars that pulled up to the parking lot. A rickety Volkswagen Beetle, the original model, came into the parking lot, raising a cyclone in noise and exhaust fumes. "Oh, that is positively antediluvian," Carrie explained in her delicate manner. anti-what? Antediluvian, Carey repeated, and explained that the word meant prehistoric or very, very old. The girls laughed in delight. It seemed to amuse Yvonne's friends no end when an antediluvian car appeared, which was very frequently. The girls would wait to see whose parents drove the car, and this would lead them to even more laughter. But nothing delighted the group more than when the parents came driving a 202. That is, using two legs or walking. It was absolutely unacceptable for anyone in the group to have parents who drove a 202. A girl like that was quickly dropped from their friendship circle. So that's kind of bringing out the whole, differences in the way kids are. They are like rich kids who go to Europe for their holidays. When they close on vacation, they go to Europe. And the others who go to work on the coffee farms, and that's what they do. And these are the differences, and these are the real differences, and this is the real Africa as it is, not just what we are shown. So there are very many so you cannot say a place like Africa. It's wrong. I hope everyone in this room never uses that term, a place like Africa, because there isn't a place like that. It's many, many different places in Africa.
I think you actually made a very valid point, and I think Massachusetts is even a different world from where I come from. I came from Utah, and so you can imagine if people in Massachusetts think of Africa, they say, what will people in Utah? Yeah. And I was a professor at Utah State University for 5 years, and you cannot believe that every single year, everybody there thinks I'm graduating. And I would put on my robes, the PhD robe with everything, and work with all the professors, and somebody will come to me and say, congratulations. And I said, for what? And he said, for making it. And that's okay. So it's kind of, this is even a new world, to be here. And I thought I was tired of the whole stories over there in Utah. And I said, oh, I think they say Massachusetts is the most liberal, the most enlightened, and I'm going there. and I came here, and I think it's different, in a way. So I guess I would go back and write a book about the experiences in Utah and, explain that, bring it in context to this, and this one would be a child's play.
Yeah, I think the media really does a disservice to everyone. It does a disservice to Africans because, for one thing, if this is the image that everyone has of Africa, it means that there's just, and that's a good example you've given, because it appears that so long as people, that's the image that people get of Africa, there is no time an African will ever be able to stand or sit across a table and be looked at as an equal. Because all you have is the image that has been fed to you over and over again about a starving, someone who is at war, who is, half human, half ape, or, whatever. There's just that idea of that Africans are not quite human yet. And this is, it may not be like, this is not even racist. It's not, I mean, I know they are the extreme racists who say, oh, those monkeys, whatever. Those are not the ones I'm talking about. I'm talking about just the idea that people watch television and all they see is starving people, all they see is people at war, all they see is these bad images. They never see the good stories. They only hear about the people who have AIDS. I mean, even AIDS, okay, it's a bad disease and it's there, it's a high prevalence. But even think about it, even in the worst places, like the ones that have 15% AIDS, 85% doesn't have it. So what do the 85% do? They live perfectly normal lives. And those stories are never told. All that is told is the bad stories. And that's what we keep seeing. And if you keep seeing those stories, that's all that's going to be in your mind. So that every time you see an African, that's all you think about. Even if the African is telling you, no, I'm a professor here. And you're like, oh no. You know, that's all there is. So I think the media really does a number for keeping people ignorant in this country, but also doing a big disservice to Africans themselves. Because, you know, and just the whole thing of it's only aid, you know, when the Africans think of themselves that way, they get this dependency syndrome where they think, oh, we'll just sit and wait to be helped. But what if, as an African, you actually think you're worthy to play in the global market like everyone else? That's the only way that Africa is going to really be try to catch up with other continents. So when you can play on equal playing field, not being given aid and being pitied and being looked down upon. I just don't believe that model has not worked. I'm sure the economists like Barney will tell you that it's been going on the last, what, 40, 50 years and it has not worked. And it's not going to work. It's only going to work when people have full respect and dignity as human beings. And as I said, it's not an exaggeration that a lot of people just do not look like at Africans as human beings. And as I said, this is not about like the real racists who will just think that way or say that way. This is real people who mean well, liberal people, but they still don't see because they have all these images that they've been seeing throughout. And hopefully that's what I would want to change, especially with the kids, because, you know, kids need to see a different style, and then as they grow up now, they can think in a better way than the grown-ups have in the past. Yes.
When is the second volume coming out?
Oh, come on. Yeah, well, you know, this I'm planning this to be a 6-part series actually. So yeah, so the second part is, you know, it's already pretty much written. It just needs to be edited. So yeah, so it's coming. Yeah.
Same question.
Yeah.
Same question. Where was the series going next? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm hoping to do book tours in school. So if you have you know, connections with schools, middle schools, it's aimed at middle school. So if you have someone who would, you know, I think it's a worthwhile message for kids to hear, and it's an interesting book for kids to read, and it's fun to read, but it also educates them. So that's where I'm trying to take this. And to me, I believe, you know, that's the way to do education. I mean, I can write a book on globalization and its effects on African children, and have it in the library and have no one ever look at it. Or I can write a readable book that kids can and grown-ups can read and actually learn something from it. So this is the way I have chosen to do my education on globalization. Yes.
Sometimes at the public library, when people present their books, it gets a very good audience and it gets the word out.
Yeah.
And I've run across books I would not have run across otherwise. So that's another way to help the audience be in touch with you and your books.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I already have a booking with the Worcester Public Library in February, so I'll be doing that. Yeah. Yes, Sudha.
I think you should try to publish it in India, because kids in India still read Enid Blyton. They need to move on.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, well, I'm hoping, like, this is only a start, you know, I'm hoping that the movement will start and it will become, you know, international or whatever, hopefully. Yes, Ras.
And just one other, just a comment, okay, that comes from my own experience here at the college. A few years ago, we were so fortunate to have as a speaker at our honors convocation, the the Archbishop of South Africa, the one who took over from Tutu.
Oh, okay.
Tutu's successor, whose name was this long and I could never remember it. But
yeah.
He challenged us in his talk at that convocation regarding our perspective on the continent of Africa, to take the globe and turn it upside down and put Africa in the northern hemisphere predominantly rather than the southern hemisphere. And he said the first thing you'll notice is how big it is compared to anything that's in the northern hemisphere now. and just challenged the whole audience to think about that in terms of the importance of that continent to the world.
Yeah,
And
and what a waste it is.
And then he said something that was really intriguing for the audience. He said, you know, no matter which way you look at the origins of life on this planet, whether you're a creationist or, you know, Darwinist or whatever, he says everybody pretty much agrees that life began in Africa. Human life began in Africa. He said, so I challenge you, no matter who you are, no matter what color you are, put a little scratch in your skin and underneath we're all Africans.
Nice, nice.
And I thought that was so...
Yeah, and I don't even go that radically.
I know it.
But my message is exactly the same, that, you know, you can live such different circumstances, but the human experiences are the same. I mean, if we are greedy, we are greedy. If we are good people, we are good people. If we are mean, and well, it's the same everywhere. You know, it's not different. But there is always that idea of, because of a certain, you know, like say in the US, the standard of living is very high. People are having all kinds of things that say maybe Africans don't have. It's that that the people are different. No, they have exactly the same feelings and the same experiences to things. You react, you know, you get angry, you get hungry, right? So that's kind of my message here. Hopefully, you know, humanizing the Africans.
And don't you find too, there's misperceptions on both sides, like you were talking about, you know, well, a place like Africa.
Yeah.
Okay, and then you also have the situation where this country, you know, is perceived in certain ways, again, because of the media and because of things that people hear and think about. And, you know, you and I have talked some about my son, who spent 5 years of his life in West Africa, and he found when he was there that he was always having to explain, no, I'm white, but I'm not rich.
Yeah.
I don't have a big pocket full of money here, you know?
Yeah. That means this. Oh, believe me, when I go home, I mean, I have to always know what I'm taking, and you know, the just thing, once you are in the US, it's like, you know, you just pick money from trees or something. So yeah, so there are, you know, different perceptions, which in a way is also, you know, not good, because you think about the kids, and I've even talked about how people try to lose their accents, so they mimic the American accents, and in fact I have an endnote here saying, you know, even though Kenyan English is, you know, it comes from Britain, it has its roots from Britain, most Kenyan kids, because of listening to American music and watching American movies, they have American mannerisms, and they try to lose their local accents, and in fact it's seen as a measure of how high class you are if you don't talk with your local accent. You know, if you talk with an American accent. I actually have a scene in the book where one of the kids is dreaming about this horrible Yvonne, and how she goes into the hall and starts separating the kids from the rich ones, from the poor ones, the ones from the rural areas, from the ones of the city, the ones with British accents and the ones with local accents, because those are all divisions, one being bad, one being good, and that doesn't help them to be proud of who they are. And you know, unless you're proud of who you are, you're not going anywhere. You know, you always be down there looking up, because you can't be what you're not. So it's not a good, you know, perception.
I come from the media, and I understand what the media is doing. The picture, just as the director said, the picture about who the white people are, you go to Africa, it's based on movies, it's based on MTV, on CNN, and other things. And of course, what would you see? You would see Hollywood. You would see, you know, people living exotic lives with all kinds of things. And that's the understanding. People that watch those movies, you know, think that's how everybody here lives. You know, they wear
Yeah.
Movies are, and of course, movies are set in exotic homes and the wonderful things that surround the homes, and everybody's dressed to kill, with cigarettes and cigars and so on and so forth. And I think that's how every one of us live. So I agree with you. The media, as I said, I'm in communications, and I keep my classes. We have a class we call media criticism, and that's the kind of things we keep, happening on our kids here. To understand that the media is not portraying any society the way they are.
Yeah.
Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.